Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a big update regarding the trade situation, and the first trade deal has just come through the pipeline with the United Kingdom. Late last night, there was an announcement that there was going to be a major trade deal in the morning. Many people thought it could have been India, possibly Japan, but it is with the UK. And there will still be a 10% tariff on a select number of goods coming from the United Kingdom. The tariff is not fully rescinded. It's not a zero for zero because of the VATs that the UK has on us, but this is a step in the right direction. And it's not to say that we trade a ton with the UK. It's a very small percent of our total trade, but it is what we're looking for in terms of being able to break through this Chinese strategy, which basically is what China wants to do in terms of the trade situation, to where they want us to not reach any deals with any other countries, which would put us in a much more reliant spot on China. If we're able to reach deals just like this one, it's going to be a lot better when it comes to negotiating with the Chinese. And Trump said earlier today that he doesn't care, if it's China coming to the United States, if it's the United States coming to China, he wants to talk to China. He wants to negotiate a new trade deal with them. You just have to wonder, can we negotiate these other deals first to potentially get a better deal from China? But you have to understand also, with China, the trade war is hurting them much more than it's hurting us, although their economy was already in a worse spot when it comes to all the deflation they had after the zero COVID policies in 2022, 2023. But this is not about China. We're talking about this is UK. People surprised there's still a 10% tariff. What's going on here? Let's take a look. The UK will reduce numerous non-tariff barriers that unfairly discriminate against American products. Billions for increased market access for American exports, along with new market access for American machinery and chemicals. Bring the UK into the economic security alignment with the US, ensure strong industrial base protections from steel. And so that's basically what it is. And you've got Trump here talking about it. Let's see what this is.
The deal includes billions of dollars of increased market access for American exports, especially in agriculture, dramatically increasing access for American beef, ethanol, and virtually all of the products produced by our great farmers. And our Secretary, as you know, of Agriculture is here. Brooke, thank you very much for being here.
Day. Thank you, sir.
You'll let the farmers know. In addition, the UK will reduce or eliminate numerous non-tariff barriers that unfairly discriminated against American products. But this is now turning out, I think, really to be a great deal for both countries, because it'll be really great for the UK also. So they're opening up the country. Their country is a little closed, and we appreciate that. They'll also be fast-tracking American goods through their customs process, so our exports go to a very, very quick form of approval, and there won't be any red tape. Things are going to move very quickly both ways.
Right. And so Trump talks about the UK opening market access for the United States. They've been more of a closed off country when it comes to trade with the US. And so that's something that's happened. It's also been negotiated to where, why would, people wondering, why would the UK agree to this? Well, we still do have 10% tariffs on the UK, but in certain sectors, the tariffs have been brought down. Like, I think the Trump had threatened to do a 25% auto tariff on the UK. That's not happening now. So there have been things to where both sides come to agreements. $5 billion in market access for U.S. exports. The tariff revenue is still around $6 billion, because we still do have a 10% tariff on certain things coming from the UK. The UK, they say here, the tariffs were around 5%. They've come down to 1.8%. Obviously, Trump's going to tweet out a graph like this. It's going to make himself look very good. But the point is that this is the first of many. These trade deals, there's going to be some haziness to them. They're not going to be an exact to where it's zero for zero. There are still tariffs on the UK, but we don't do a ton of trade with the UK anyways. So it's not like, well, if the tariffs were 10% on certain things, 5% on others, it's not really going to make a difference. It's like 3% of our total trade. So the point here is this is a good first step. We're waiting for the bigger trade deals, specifically India, because we think India can supplement or at least substitute for China when it comes to our potential trade deal with China, which would give us more leverage over the Chinese in negotiations, because there was not a reliance on China. If we have India, Japan, South Korea, other countries that we do deals with, and trust me, the Chinese do not want us to deal with deals with those countries. They started threatening those countries after we put the initial 145% tariff on China. They put 125% tariff on us. Certain aspects of those tariffs have been brought down, but the gist of it is the main numbers are still the same. The raw is 145% tariff outside of electronics and other things. And then China also brought some of their tariffs down because, I mean, it hurts, especially for a short, you're talking about a short time frame before the negotiations, 125, 145. I mean, Trump was talking about it. His administration sounds like an embargo. The tariffs are just insane between the United States and China. Both countries know that can't continue. But when it comes to this deal with the UK, I would say the United States gets increased market access within the UK, and we do keep the 10% tariff on certain sectors. So we're going to be, Trump says around $6 billion is probably per year in terms of external revenue from the UK. It's not a crazy trade deal. People say it's not even a trade deal. It's just like an understanding. Well, I mean, when it comes to whether or not we tariff them on certain things at 10% or not, that's really not going to affect anything in terms of the inflationary aspect of it. Because you look at what happened yesterday, I didn't talk about it. The Fed, they didn't cut. They're very likely not going to cut in the June meeting either. What they're waiting for, maybe they actually do cut, but it's looking extremely unlikely based off of the betting that I saw that they're not going to cut in June. We want them to cut, and Powell said they will cut, but later this year, and a lot of it is in regards to the trade negotiations. I would probably say specifically with China. Even if we come to an agreement with these other countries, I mean, it doesn't make sense for them to say, well, there needs to be agreements with all these countries. We're only tariffing all the countries at 10% rates outside of China and the auto tariffs, which are different. So I think the reasoning that the Fed will not cut is because they're concerned about inflation, mainly caused by the tariffs with China. But if we come to a trade deal with China to where both, I mean, there's still going to be tariffs on China. It's not going to come down, and there's still tariffs on the UK, but certain things have been brought down. So we understand, and that's really kind of how it's Trump is approaching this. But that is the first major trade deal. You've also got this. China says the United States asked for a trade meeting in Switzerland. Trump originally denied this and said no, it was China who did it. And then today he said, I just want the U.S. and China to meet. So I do think it was the United States that asked for this meeting, honestly, just based off of what, if you read the tea leaves. Not that it matters too much, but you could argue that, well, that puts China in more of a position of strength if the U.S. is the one asking for the meeting and then publicly denying it to try and save the public presence. And it's just all public posturing when you're talking about these two countries. Every little thing. Who asks for the meeting? Will there be negotiations? China demanding the United States treat them fairly before negotiations can even begin. What does that mean? But it's all this public stuff. It's all honor. It's all respect between the adversaries. So... And in China, they can swing the whole thing. Oh, we're victims of all of this. Of course, it was their original, the way that they manipulated and took advantage of free trade that caused this in the first place. We need to do trade with China for sure. They're a valuable partner, but not in the way that it was being done. There had to be some type of autocorrect. And you could argue that there should even be a bigger autocorrect in terms of Trump keeping the tariffs on everyone. The problem is you have a 4-year window. When you have a 4-year window, it's it's hard to have these crazy, just aggressive tariffs when you're talking about the economy possibly taking multiple years to recover, but it could also reset the housing market. But it's like you just can't do it. So it's like, every president tries to, or at least what Trump is trying to do, it's like bandage the situation and do it all within like 6 months, which is what they're trying to do. It's like the tariff policy goes into place and then all the trade deals happen possibly by July or August. That could happen. It's like a 6-month thing with the tariffs and everything like that. And you're talking about a total reset in terms of the inflation going down because of the tariffs. And this is really a remarkable thing, and people aren't going to understand that the inflation did go down because of the tariff situation. They say, well, tariffs cause inflation. Well, when you're talking about the initial tariffs, you're talking about market turmoil, especially the way Trump approached the situation. He was very wishy-washy. There was no real concrete plan saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z on these dates, and this is how it's going to be. Trump would say, well, there's going to be a tariff on Mexico and China. Now we're taking it off. There's going to be a tariff on this country. Now we're taking it off. There's going to be a tariff on that country. Now we're going to do this crazy, huge tariffs. Nobody even knew what Liberation Day was going to be. And so the market reacts to that in a negative way, and in turn, it forces inflation down. Now, you could say, well, you have a stagflation problem if you don't come to a trade agreement with China, because at that point, these tariffs, I mean, you've got 145% tariff on China when we've got a crazy deficit with them. So they sell us a bunch of stuff, and there's basically an embargo level tariff. Then you're talking about inflation going up, possibly because things in the United States will cost more, and the GDP not going up because of the trade restrictions that we have because of the tariffs. That's what we're trying to avoid. So the idea is there's a sweet spot to where you negotiate with all these countries, you force China to the negotiating table. I mean, I think the China negotiation is going to be a while. They can have like 10 or 11 different meetings probably before something gets solved. But you force them to the negotiating table within 6 or 7 months. Most of the tariffs are off. There's still going to be tariffs on China. That'll never go away. Just like there's still tariffs on the UK after this trade deal. But most of the tariff pressure will be alleviated. That's the point. And when that happens, you're talking about maybe there's the sweet spot of there's no more tariff problem for the Fed, and the inflation is still down. And the energy sector is down, the crude oil's down. Now you've got 4 or 5 straight Fed meetings where the rates are cut. Possibly quarter 3, quarter 4, 2025. I think that's probably what Trump wants. So it's like there's a sweet spot in terms of a window, but you would love to have these trade deals negotiated, specifically the China, because all of these other trade deals, the tariff level is only 10%. So it's not like there's this crazy need to negotiate with all of these countries immediately. It's a 10% tariff. And so that's something that can be lived with for a time period. And that's why you see, there's really no trade deals right now. But I do think the India deal is going to happen. The India deal happens relatively soon. Vance was meeting with India a few weeks ago. He was there on a visit. And if that happens, it's going to put more pressure on China. You get the Japan deal. You get the Vietnam deal, Taiwan, all of these countries within the Pacific. And that's what we're really looking for. So, and then the negotiations with China happen. But listen, if this entire tariff situation, because there's always going to be tariffs on China under Trump. That's just the reality. He kept tariffs on China, and they said, well, they were more strategic. Now it's wider. But there's still going to be strategic tariffs when we negotiate with China. The tariff, the 145% will come down because that's just negotiations. Just like China's 125% tariff on us is going to come down. I mean, both countries have already brought them down on certain things like electronics because they have to. It's like a necessity. And I think Trump made a deal with Apple. But eventually, maybe I can't give a prediction in terms of when it's going to get solved. I don't know. But maybe by July, maybe by August, the entire tariff situation, we have like a plan. We have certain tariffs remaining because there's going to be tariffs probably on a lot of these countries. We can come to agreements, but if there's VATs that are still on place, which is the same thing as a tariff, and I don't know if maybe they brought some of them down. Maybe that's what Trump was referencing when it came to the trade barriers. That's one trade barrier. It's VATs, but I was told that no, the VATs are still on. If the VATs are still on, why would we remove our 10% tariff? It's basically the exact same thing. So it's like a value-added tax, but it makes our products less competitive because there's a tax onto them that our companies that import do not pay, but the companies that are taking on the product pay. So those companies are less likely to take on foreign product because the tax that has to be paid on it to enter the country. So I think we're trying to thread a needle here when it comes to getting all these trade deals done in like a 4 or 5, maybe like a 3-month time frame. And if you're able to, because the thing is at a certain point, you don't want there to be this unknowingness in the market in terms of what Trump's going to do with tariffs. You keep some certain tariffs on China. Whenever we negotiate with China and a lot of these other countries, there's probably still going to be tariffs that remain on them. Like there's still tariffs on the UK on certain things, but again, it's 10%. 10% on select sectors, that's really not going to cause inflation. And again, the issue would be the stagflation that would be caused by the negotiations with China dragging on to where, well, I mean, even if we negotiate with other countries, if you have 145% tariff on China, and it's almost impossible to do any trade with them for a certain amount of time, if Trump could lead for 10 years, we would be able to dig our feet in. You don't have that option with the United States and how we operate. We've got an election in 2028. So when we're you would love to see a potential reset of the economy to try and fix some things. It's more of a duct tape job, basically. That's what you have to do. You don't have there's not enough runway. There's not enough runway to really make any meaningful. I mean, maybe this is it. Maybe they could negotiate a great deal with China, but China is not going to concede and just give the United States an amazing deal, especially considering we're the ones asking for these meetings and stuff. You can see the writing on the wall. I mean, we still certainly with the way it's set up, and you can say, well, a lot of people in China live in poverty, so it's not apples to apples in terms of the economic impact. I mean, I guess, but fundamentally, they're going to be hurt more by the tariffs than we are 100%. Because they have a massive surplus with us. I'm not saying we're not going to be hurt, especially at the beginning, but, and Trump had said going into negotiations, I'm not going to lower the tariffs on China. You cannot do that at all. Going into negotiations to get China to come to the table. There cannot be any more of that. You have to ride it out. You have to ride it out. The longer this goes on, the more it hurts China. So I think that's the point. And whenever this happens, and that's kind of why it's like, well, there's 4 years. You got to kind of negotiate this because we want the thing is in Q3, I think it's going to be an amazing economic time for our economy. I mean, because when you think about it, if we get these trade deals done, especially the China one, we would hope that the inflation, and I think the inflation, it's the 10th, so 2 days, the inflation numbers are still going to be down. Based off of the crude oil prices I've seen, the inflation should stay down, even with the improvement we've seen in the economy. Because you could argue that could drive up inflation slightly in terms of we had like 9 straight positive days in the NASDAQ, S&P. It's like a record since 2004. And now it's fully recovered, by the way. That's another thing that I'm surprised people are like, well, we are going to get a recession because, honestly, a recession. But like a recession's irrelevant. It's probably good to go through something like that. But even like a recession, it doesn't even make... Because the thing is, you're talking about minus 0.3 GDP growth, which Trump easily could have turned positive if the United States would have... If their government would have spent like Biden did. It would have been positive. They just would have spent more. Trump didn't do it. It would have been... So it's like, what are we even talking about here in terms of recession? So all Trump has to do is spend more money, and we don't have a recession because it's 2 straight quarters of negative GDP growth. But I don't think there's going to be negative GDP growth in Q2. The Atlanta Fed already predicted like plus 2.7. But people were saying without the tariff situation, it would have been plus 3% growth. Even Powell said the indicators still look strong through the uncertainty. And the uncertainty he's referencing is the trade situation, the tariff situation that Trump is saying, well, negotiations are going to be happening. Well, let's negotiate all these deals. Once the deals get negotiated, they're going to bring the rates down. Powell has already referenced it that the rates are coming down later this year. We just can't deal with higher inflation to a degree. How are we going to have higher inflation? Look at the energy sector. The only way we get higher inflation is if this drags on for a longer period of time in terms of our negotiations with China. But I am surprised that Trump is calling this meeting with China. I mean, maybe it wasn't the United States. I think it was, though. China said the United States asked for the trade meeting. Trump says, no, that's not true. Then they asked Trump, the media asked Trump today, well, what do you think about that? And he says, I just hope it gets done. It doesn't matter who asked who. Well, yeah, it kind of does matter. It's about leverage and desperation between the countries. If the United States is asking for it, I mean, you could say these are preliminary discussions in Switzerland. So maybe they're just I think they're just preliminary, but I don't know where the United States is in terms of these other trade deals. Trump says they're close. He says he could agree to all of them right now if he wanted to, with Japan, with South Korea, which is it is a notable thing to say because China does not want these trade deals to go through. China does not want other countries negotiating with the United States. And now the UK has, and maybe the EU is next, but I think it's going to be India is going to be a major player in this. If we get a deal done with India, that's going to be a big hit to China in terms of Apple saying they want to move their production to India for the time being, and you have to do it because we don't have the infrastructure in the United States to be able to do that right now. If you're talking about massive tariffs on China that potentially are going to stay on to a degree, I mean, you don't go from 145% to 0%. That's not going to be happening. There's still going to be tariffs on China. And see, it just goes to show you, like our trade deal with the UK, it's not automatically 0 for 0 because that's what India proposed. Well, it's not that simple. especially when you're talking about other trade barriers. Now, if you get rid of all your VATs, then we can maybe talk about doing something like that. But the point of the UK trade deal is just more US competitiveness in the UK market. They're very restrictive in terms of what they allow. But if they're going to still have VATs on us, we're going to have to keep a 10% tariff on certain things. I know the 10% has been eliminated on products, on certain products, but not all of it. So there's still a 10% rate. Trump says it's going to be around six or seven total billion dollars, I guess, in annual revenue from those tariffs. But people keep talking about the amount of money that we can make off of tariffs, and based off of the fact that we've brought it down to 10%, based off of the fact that we're going to be negotiating with a lot of these countries, I still think Trump wants to generate a decent amount of money. Just reading the tea leaves off of that UK trade deal that we just did, he still wants to generate a lot of money through tariff revenue. And it's not, I mean, when it comes to negotiations with all these countries, I don't know if it's going to be, because if you keep the auto tariffs on, they say that's 100 billion. Now it's 100 billion for a short period of time, because you would imagine if Trump says, no, we're ironclad going to keep these tariffs on, you're going to get more domestic auto production. That, by the way, a lot of liberals support that. That's a bipartisan thing in terms of the auto industries moving back to the United States. So, but you're talking about $100 billion just in auto tariffs alone, and then you keep a lot of these other tariffs on. I mean, 6 or 7 billion from the UK, who we barely trade with, and a 10% tariff rate on certain items. I mean, 7 billion. You're talking about with what we can generate from China. Maybe it is around $300 or $400 billion in tariff revenue. I don't know. I would still probably say, even if you keep the auto tariffs on, because you're going to get more domestic production, the revenue is going to go down. It might be like 150, $200 billion maybe, which is, listen, that's still good money in tariff revenue. But this whole idea of $600 or $700 billion, it's not going to happen. I mean, they have to be able to generate, hopefully, more tariff revenue. When you've got a $2 trillion deficit, and you have the current situation we have to where now Trump is trying to pass this new bill, and he's promised it, but it's more tax cuts. So we're already running at a $2 trillion deficit, and we're giving more tax cuts, which would create a bigger deficit unless you can supplement it with something else. Maybe it's tariff revenue or curbing some type of government spending. I mean, I know that we saw the new budget. It's $1.01 trillion military budget, which surprised a lot of people. There was original thought that Trump was going to bring down the military budget by 8% over 4 years, but now he wants to raise it by $150 billion. We have an $850 billion military budget. He wants it at $1 trillion in military budget, which, this is a short-term thing. People are not going to like this, I understand, but I'm just saying that will also help the economy in terms of government spending on military if you've got something like that. And by the way, that's a very bullish time period. You get this passed, and this is like Q3, Q4. It's crazy tax cuts, and it's more spending on the military. Long term, you could say that's a problem. Short term, especially when you're talking about a window to where we get these trade deals done, that's going to be a very, very good timeline. In Q3, Q4, 2026, Q1, the indicators are amazing because we have low inflation, extremely low trueflation. I don't know what it is, like 1.4. The core inflation is probably going to print the same as last month, or maybe lower, but probably the same from what I saw in terms of the betting markets. So you have all these numbers that are just amazing that will force the Fed to cut rates once you reach a deal with China and all these other countries. And they've admitted they're going to do it. There might be 3 or 4 straight rate cuts in meetings in Q3, Q4 of 2025. And that's also when, and apparently it's already been reported, QT is being eased, and we're going to go into a QE period possibly in Q1 of 2026. So you're going to get into the easing period. And it is a very, very good time frame for possibly early 2026 for the United States to really be in an economic situation with all of these trade deals worked out to where we can really, I mean, Trump just said today, he said, people need to start buying stocks. Well, yeah, because there's a lot of things that we can see, and the bedrock is laid with the energy sector, with lower inflation. Then the Fed cuts come, but it also has to be laid now because there's a new element to all of this. And by the way, think about the Fed cuts and the refinancing of $6 trillion. Could you imagine that when we get we're going to get we're going to get the rates down to about 2%, I think, because there's going to be 4 or 5 straight cuts in Q3, Q4. So when we have to refinance that, Trump can brag during the midterms about saving in terms of debt and just debt payments, $400 billion. I'm not kidding. If you're refinancing 6 trillion or 9 trillion, some people say it's $9 trillion in 2026. At 4.5% or 4% interest rate, now it's 2%. You've cut it in half. That you might save like $100 billion in that alone. And that comes from sacrifice through tariff uncertainty. The tariffs have brought inflation down, and they're not going to drive it up because Trump is doing all of these deals before they take effect in terms of the inflationary aspects. It takes time for that to really happen. So as long as you can get these deals done within a certain amount of time, we really won't see crazy negative aspects. But this is the thing. It depends how the deals are structured, because I can't say exactly the inflationary effects, especially the deal with China. Because all these other deals, the countries have a 10% tariff. It's really not going to cause crazy inflation if you have a 10% tariff on certain countries. Well, I shouldn't say certain country, it's every country. Outside of now the UK, there still is 10% tariff on certain things. But it depends what the trade deal is with China, is what I'm saying. So that's basically the bottom line, guys. But yeah, that was a good deal with the UK. I mean, I think it's certainly a very positive movement. Liberals like, oh, there's still a 10% tariff. Well, no, a lot of the tariffs got eased. There's 10% on certain things. It's around $7 billion in annual revenue. And we're also going to be a lot more competitive. And it's going to help farmers be competitive in the UK markets. And so that's the renegotiation. You can say, well, it's a letdown. It's not India. It's not. But I said it takes time. These trade deals will happen. And so that's just the reality of it. But guys, make sure you like this video down below. Also follow me on X. Link to that's in the description.